can go ahead and start the introduction maybe 1 minute early. First thing, after this, there will be a simulcast for Alicia here in this room, so if you want to stay and avoid the hassle and listen to the full talk, that's an opportunity.
Opening for
welcome everybody. It's the last session, so woo, you made it, right? And give yourself a round of applause. Great RSA, and focus on the art of what's possible. So what's possible is we've all made it to this point. The session today is FUD versus reality, bracing for an AI-powered threat landscape. So very interesting topic for us all, I'm sure. Our moderator, Jessica Lyons, cybersecurity editor at The Register. Panelist John Dwyer, Director of Threat Research and Binary Defense. Srinivas Tamala Penta, Distinguished Engineer, CTO, Master Inventor, IBM Consulting Security Services, and Alicia Wyckoff, Director of Global Threat Intelligence at America Lead PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you. A round of applause for our panel.
Well, thank you all for joining us and being here again, last panel of the day. So we're really appreciative to see so many people in the audience. Also, I'm sure you all have sat through several panels on AI this week because that's been a hot topic. But the cool thing about ours is that we're really grounded in reality. This isn't hugely theoretical. I think this one is a lot of useful information. And again, we hope that it all is stuff you can take with you. So as we kick off, I'm going to have each of our panelists talk a little bit about their role at their respective organizations and how that informs the lens through which they view the AI-powered landscape. So Srini, we'll start with you to kick us off here.
So I'm part of the cybersecurity services, and my role on cybersecurity services is to use AI for defensive purposes and also help clients to build trustworthy AI and provide secure AI solutions. So what I'm bringing to the table here is the value that we are creating for our clients and how we are helping them through their AI journey.
Allison?
Thanks, Jessica. So I lead PricewaterhouseCoopers Global Threat Intelligence practice from an America's point of view. So I have a global team of 35 people across 11 different countries who focus solely on researching threat actors. So what are they doing? How are they doing it? Why are they doing it? So I've got a mix of strategic and technical analysts on my team that produce output for people to be informed about what's happening and why. So what I am bringing to this conversation is basically what we're seeing in the threat space and also what we expect to see just based on how threat actors operate.
John?
I was mostly a personality hire, but
This is true.
it's not bad though. So generally, our mission as a company at Binary Defense is to make the world a safer place, right? And where my team fits into that is we have a lot of visibility into what's actually going on in the world. And we take that in and trying to either find interesting insights or points of view of like what's next or what people need to be prepared for, but also seeing if there's interesting problems we can try to solve and go into our product and services, you know, to make everything. I would say like one of the, as an aside, okay, so this is going to be a recorded, which is great, and live on forever. So a message to the future sentient AI overlords that we're all allies, and we deserve a great spot in the matrix. That's mostly why I'm here.
Thank you, John. You're safe now. So as we talk about AI, it's not a new technology, but Allison, I want to single you out here. Talk about, is this something new for criminals to be using, and how did you see cyber criminals using AI kind of prior to the whole ChatGPT, Gen AI boom?
Right. So the way that we talk about threat actors is motivationally based. So we have seen in the past, leading up to Gen AI and all these large language models being publicly available, that some of the more espionage-centric actors were minimally using AI generation or image generation, so social engineering type of operations. We think that they were probably using it for phishing, just to make the phishing emails seem more legitimate. But we confirmed we have a couple groups that we've seen use AI images in phishing and social engineering operations.
John, did you see much of a change in the way that threat actors were using Gen AI last year?
Well, Allison actually said something really excellent to the point, which is really, oh, you're gonna love this type X. So it can quickly become the art of the possible in terms of like what adversaries could do with AI. And we get into a lot of speculation. Did this come from it? And quite honestly, unless you have a deep level of access, it's really hard to confirm. But what Allison said that I completely agree with is that the goals and the objectives of the adversaries haven't shifted seismically, right? So there is evidence that they're doing something to accelerate or amplify or improve upon existing attack types, but we haven't seen a monumental shift in the types of attack adversaries are coming with. So we can take that as ground truth to say they're likely, if they're using it to accelerate or amplify an attack type that we already sort of understand.
Right. So Srini, curious what you have seen in terms of, are you seeing the same level of investment that we're seeing from enterprises, defenders, how they're using AI? Are you seeing that same level of investment from cyber criminals and how they're using AI?
Yep. So John alluded to one point. So we have seen, there are indicators that cyber criminals have invested into generative AI techniques to make the attacks more complex, to have high volume attacks and other newer techniques, generate newer techniques and evade defenses. So we have seen that definitely, and that has come into the attack vectors, and we have seen that as part of our defenses as well, defense strategies as well. We've also seen attackers or bad actors create their own ChatGPT type environment. So for a fee of less than $100 per month, there is a ChatGPT-like environment for bad actors. So what that has done is it has lowered the entry barriers for more people to come into the hacking and be bad actors on that. Right? With that, we'll get more complicated attacks, more volume attacks, more sophisticated attacks, and the spam content creation will be more sophisticated and more cleaner. So yes, there has been there, and then we probably are not seeing that high volume yet, but there are indicators that they are there. As Allison was mentioning about the deepfake, obviously there are deepfake creators that are there, and that will cause us more problems in the future.
Right. So I don't know about the three of you, but I feel like even just looking at last year's RSA conference versus this year, there was a lot more concern, maybe fear, since the title of our panel is FUD versus reality. I'm curious to see what you think about if 2023 was the year of FUD. How much did this concern over AI and to some extent fear, was this warranted? Was this concern that we saw from organizations over the use of AI warranted? John, you want to tackle that one first?
Yeah. So certainly the whole title of it is FUD. It was like, what's the reality? I actually don't necessarily think it's a terrible thing that we are talking about a technology before we yeet it out into the public, right? If you think about the lessons that we've used in the past, it's like with e-commerce and cloud, there wasn't government hearings about how we were going to secure this thing before it went out. So even though there is a bit of fear, like I would say like the sentient AI coming to take everyone's jobs or take over the world is likely fear-based, right? And while you can get generative AI to do things, it usually requires a bit of domain expertise for you even to get it out there. So I think there is a bit of that fear, mostly in human out of the loop kind of stuff. There is some concerns, which is rightfully so, which is, how could someone do that? And I think that that's actually a really good conversation point. I think what you'll hear from like Allison and Srini is that it's a good conversation to have as long as we're tying it back to what's realistic.
Yeah, I think, from my view, when I look at AI, there's basically two streams that I look at it under the lens of the work that I do. One, how can threat actors exploit it? So, we're running our own AI instances internally. Can they pollute it, potentially with garbage data? Because again, this is still a tool, right? Garbage in, garbage out, good stuff in, good stuff out. And then how are threat actors using it for their own operations as well? So that's the lens that we've sort of been looking at this from like more of a TI perspective.
Yeah, there's certainly the other part of this is the AI attack surface, and then there's the AI threat landscape. We got to make sure that we don't conflate those two things. However, they will probably converge at some point, right? So we are, I would say, in a pre-mass market time for AI. Like there's no one single integrator for a platform for AI yet. But when that happens, we're going to have that overlap of adversarial AI and the threat landscape. And I would say, from a fear point of view, like markers that we should be looking out for, is when the threat landscape changes a type of goal and objective that we are not necessarily prepared for. That is the lesson that we have to take from ransomware, right? Like before enterprise ransomware was a thing, we weren't really thinking about a disruption in the threat landscape that was used going to extort on the massive scale. And we saw that we needed to pivot for that. So that's the thing that we got to look out for, is when you see a type of attack with a different sort of objective come up, that's when we need to start considering those points.
Let's bring that back to the threat landscape then for a minute too, and not just art of the possible, but practical. What does that look like right now in practical terms? What are we seeing? How much of an impact does AI have on the threat landscape now?
Well, Srini brought up deepfakes, right? And the lower the barrier of entry. That's probably been the thing that's changed the most, is ubiquitous access to deepfake technology. Like you can just clone that repo online, and it does incredibly great work, right? And Srini can talk a little bit about some of the research that they've done, which is very interesting, which is in that vein, where it doesn't take too much to generate a realistic phishing email with a AI-generated image, maybe it's an AI-generated persona online, and then follow that through with a real-time deepfake. That's realistic. That's the realistic situation where they're using it as a tool to go through. We're seeing it in the romance scams right now, right?
Yeah,
like real-time deepfakes.
Yeah, I was reading a report when we were prepping for this. Just Microsoft released a report in February on what they were seeing and how the adversaries were using a lot of the AI technology, and it goes back to what we were talking about in terms of like threat actor motivations. They haven't changed. We're seeing rudimentary use of these tools to help just kind of speed up the process. So they reported that North Korea-based threat actors were doing research on NGOs that were doing North Korea-based work. That's old motivations from that particular space. Iran-based threat actors were doing code development. Again, that's not super surprising. And Russia-based threat actors were doing SATCOM research. So again, like I'm reading through this and having been in this space a fair amount of time, I just kind of laughed. They're using this technology the same way we are using it for business purposes. Speeding up analysis, getting like menial tasks done that would normally take us a little bit longer. The phishing emails is probably like the best example, right? In the past, we were able to tell in some cases when we were being phished because there were grammatical errors or they just completely missed the boat on things like that. Hopefully, well, I won't say hopefully, but that may be a thing of the past now. I mean, we're still seeing some just terrible phishing emails, and unfortunately they work, but the tools are still very much in a rudimentary use by a lot of the threat actors.
Right. Shreeding, do you want to say something about the threat landscape? I have another FUD-based question.
Let's go for the FUD-based question. Yep.
So, I'm curious about what you're seeing from consumers, and especially those who are deploying security technologies. Does this FUD cause them to lose confidence in the technologies that they're deploying?
Right. So, much like any adoption, during even cloud security, cloud adoption and DevOps adoption, right, you'll have consumers or creators jump in with 2 feet. Some people will tip toe into it, and some people are very skeptical onto it. So we have to assume that as a ground fact. What we should do is we have to manage them, educate them on the creation of AI, for example. So I look at it as you are consumer of an AI, you are builder of an AI. So that's our two persona groups. For the consumer of AI, what is more important? It's about the accuracy of the information. It's about not having that bias, not hallucinating. That's what they look for. They want that credible information come back to them. For the creators of the AI, it's very, very important for them to create trustworthy AI. Where do they start for creating the trustworthy AI? It's about the trustworthy data. The data has to be inspected for accuracy, no sensitive information, trademark information, or any kind of information that would cause bias or hallucination on that. Once that foundation is created and they have that good data set and they train the model on that good data set and they ensure that models do not have vulnerabilities and exposures and have hack possibilities, right? Then you're now creating trustworthy AI with that accurate results. So you're on one creating the good AI, right? On the other end, you're educating the consumers to use the AI in the right way, not to leak sensitive information or do any kind of bad activity on that particular AI. While you're educating and bringing both the persona groups up, that's how you build trust in terms of adopting that particular AI, right? So this has happened on cloud as well, right? There are people on cloud who are skeptical about cloud. Oh, I'll lose my data, or no, cloud will have a lot of exposure. But over a period of time, people started trusting it. And models, consumption models evolved, and they now are adopting it in a hybrid way. We will now see the same pattern on the AI adoption as well.
It's a great
All right.
point on the risk and governance. We haven't even tapped into that yet.
Yep. But I want to state one thing, and you may consider this as I'm creating fear and uncertainty here. But think about this. I just want to have everybody think about this for a moment. When we create this AI, trustworthy AI, and we are training the models on the data, for some reason, somebody said that you're infringing on my trademark or you're infringing on my data, and they'll ask it to be unlearned. Okay? Think about it as GDPR policy as right to be forgotten. If the policy comes in and say you got to unlearn from that, that's a very, very difficult task. So what do we have to do? Right from the get-go, create trustworthy AI with that trustworthy data. Okay? Right.
Yeah, it's a great point. I was just listening and thinking about that of like, the development of these generative AI as we go through is going to be shaping a lot of our collective realities of the world, right? So we live in this time and it's only going to get worse, right? Not worse, or let's say it's only going to get more complicated. You can live in the same physical space and experience the world extraordinarily different because your reality is more and more based on what you pay attention to. And if we don't have trustworthy AI where we can say this is how we came to that answer, we can actually start to shift the public's perception of reality through how this model comes to an answer, because we're going to get there. It's a ground truth. I mean, I do it all I personally Google stuff a lot less because I just have ChatGPT basically ask it the question and it does, for lack of a better term, but the Googling on the back end and give me the answer. And like I'm often, unless it's something super important, I'm not like fact checking that. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's the way we do this now. And to Srini's point is, I think the part that is not FUD that does create concern, at least for me, is how much this technology is going to shape our perception of the world around us in the future.
Well, and then it gets back to the whole use case for threat actors and cyber criminals to use it to amplify messages and spread those further.
Yes.
The whole disinformation that I think is one key use that we're already seeing in terms of AI and how threats can be amplified.
Yep.
In that regard too.
And
so
if you don't do this correctly, there will be these alt facts embedded into the AI systems, and people will retrieve that information and project it as facts.
Right. And again, people are doing that even without AI too, but this can help speed up that process.
Yep.
So I want everyone to pull out their crystal balls now, and we're going to look a little bit into the future. What do you see in terms of looking ahead at the AI-powered threat landscape? How is it changing? What do you expect to see in the future? And are organizations prepared for this?
Yeah,
Please go.
take a stab at it from a threat actor point of view. So we were talking about this earlier. The threat actor motivations haven't changed, right? It's just, like you said, lowering the barrier of entry for a lot of threat actors to get into the space. So one of the things that I have been thinking about since all of this amazing technology has become so available is I think about all of the data that has been lost, or breached, credentials, and how it is trivial at this point using these large language models to siphon through that data and find what it is you're particularly interested in as a threat actor. And I think about all the historical breaches where we've still got this data floating around, like on the dark web. I had a session earlier where we were talking about the materiality clause in the new SEC ruling, and with AI, are we going to see like old breach data crop back up, and people are going to have to reinvestigate that? Like, is this new? Is this old? You know, those types of scenarios are what I'm thinking about in terms of threat actor use as this becomes more ingrained in how we do things.
Totally agree. So that's we don't have to do any technological advancement to use a large language model to do data distillation and summarization. Now data is a currency now that we can have to use to make our models better, but like there's been, for the last 20 years, there's been just an exfiltration party going on, right? And so whoever has all of that data, there's now the capability to weaponize it or at least help operationalize things. In the short term, I don't see, speaking of FUD though, like, it gets a lot of clicks. Be like, oh, I got ChatGPT to write a piece of malware or whatever, right? You can get a large language model and generative AI to write code for you. And potentially, if you had enough domain expertise, you could actually get it to write some sort of malware that would technically work, right? But just because something's technically possible doesn't mean it's gonna be probable. There's organizations out there spending $11 billion a year on trying to get generative AI to write code, right? But the last time I checked, IBM, Microsoft, and Google are still hiring software engineers, right? So if they haven't figured it out, I don't think that the threat actor is going to be able to write some Terminator malware that can bypass everything, and we can work through that. And
and let's really talk about
Yeah.
that, because threat actors are lazy, like full stop. They are not going to iterate unless they have to. And you know, even with some of the threat actors that we've seen that have incorporated like AI images into their operations, they're still using like the same phishing themes. We're still seeing phishing works. Not everyone's got MFA everywhere. You know, the tools, the TTPs that threat actors are using have not changed. Like,
yeah, scheduled
really,
tasks
really.
still for
Yeah.
20 years running, the goat of persistence, right? So like what? Why? We can take that.
I mean, it works.
Yeah.
It works.
So Srini, let's move back kind of to the defender side of things, and I'm curious to hear what the defenders need to be doing to protect against these AI threats.
So between the conversation until now, we've established that the attack surface of AI has changed. Okay? And if you look at what has hit the press, is there are misconfigurations that have happened and that potentially leak the training data set. The second thing is DDoS attacks happened on infrastructure, okay? And outages have been caused. This is large service providers' infrastructure. And third one is deepfakes have been created, and you know, $25 million was transacted by a financial worker because of a deepfake. Okay? That's the kind of things that you have. Now you see, take these three scenarios on how the exposures have happened. If you take the DDoS attack, right, it is conventional attack. We know how to solve that problem. It is an infrastructure-based attack. It's a conventional problem. So apply the conventional technologies that you already have. The second one is misconfiguration happened on the cloud environment, but it's about training data set. The conventional, what happens in the training data set, it is can be taken out, data can be poisoned, put it back, and the model will learn out of that. It's a conventional threat, conventional attack took a new meaning on that. But we still have the technologies to identify that this is a training data set, this is something that needs to be applied. Now, these are the policies that needs to be applied. So we can use those techniques to apply defensive measures. The third one is, it's about the prompt injections. It's about the deepfake creations. These are new attacks. threat types, right? So for those things, we need the new detection and response mechanisms in order to protect that. So if you take that kind of an approach, right, and if you take a more of an incremental approach, and you have what is being consumed in my enterprise, what is being developed in enterprise, what conventional technologies that I have, so I go put the measures, defensive measures on that right now, and what else I need to bring to the table to protect it. That's how you incrementally evolve. Along with the AI journey of your business units, you can also evolve the security and compliance of it and have them secure by design.
Yeah, I think there's more. I'm actually, I mean, the people that know me is not shocked that I'm going to have an optimistic view on this. But I actually think for like AI for security, it was like, I think that this is a moment in time where we actually can start to make things more expensive for the attackers. Like if you really think about it, we've all said the same thing. We know how these attacks happen. They haven't really changed their objectives, but they're still successful. And I think that at the end of the day, Srini, you've been working on big enterprise data for a long time. It's like we don't necessarily have a capability problem in security. Presented with the right information, humans will generally make the right decision on security. So what we actually have is a context problem. And we finally have a piece of technology that can transform security to contextualize the threat and contextualize activity for an analyst to make a decision. Just what we were talking about, like with how adversaries may do data summarization and data distillation. That's going to change things for the better if we invest this properly in adding AI for security operations to enhance our people, probably not replace them.
So we talked about deep fakes a little bit. I kind of want to touch on this more and drill down a little bit about deep fakes, about AI use for deception. As we're all really aware, this is a year where there's elections happening across the globe. We've already seen some examples of AI being used for these purposes in other elections. Here with the Joe Biden robocall, even although I guess I was a magician with a voice that sounded like Joe Biden. So let's touch on how deepfakes are being used in things like elections, global conflict, just to try to erode general trust in systems like democracy. What are we seeing here?
So the deepfakes, both voice-based, image-based, and the image and videos-based, those are real now, and they can be created with very minimal effort and investment. I was able to create, I'm not a hacker, I've never done this, but in this case, I was wanting to experiment it with $1 and 10 minutes time. I was able to create a very decent voice fake. Okay. This vendor they were charging like $5 a month, and they said, first month you get a discount of $4. So it only costed me $1, right? So with that voice clone, we were able to show that this is how the voice clones can happen. And we have a technology to detect and respond on those things. Now think about this as, I'm not a hacker, right? And this is where the lower barrier to entry has happened. We have found, one is the robocalls that happened in the US. And in India, I was observing the elections over India. There were videos that were deepfaked of celebrities endorsing a government or a party which is not in power right now. So they were endorsing those things, and they're trying to influence, and these people are not even hackers, right? They were trying to influence the elections to the other party. And there's a huge road on that, like who's going to do the fact checks? Now, is that real? Is that no, not real? And they were expanding that in terms of propagating those deep fakes to larger media outlets. So that's one thing in terms of the democracy and how they're trying to influence the elections. And during wartime, there have been videos released in media in Russia and Ukraine where the president's voice, the video is accurate, but the president's voice was manipulated, and they were saying they were surrendering, right? So which never happened. So that's the kind of impact that can have on elections and society and democracy at large, which is very risky at this time. We've got to apply the technologies that detect, do the fact check, and say, okay, at least fingerprint it and say this is good, this is not good, and that way we can establish trust.
And what about just the larger impact on whether or not people trust these systems, like democracy, like the process, not necessarily just intending to influence or sway an election one way or the other, but what can it do to trust?
when I think about all of what we've been talking about in terms of like deep fakes, and there's a whole lot of concern about it, there's a couple things. One, there's not a whole lot of the technology available in open sources. I want to know what tool you're using though, because I want to play with that. But I think about deep fakes and misinformation, and I think a lot of it is retraining our users. I think we've done a really good job with like the social engineering stuff, but I think about a lot of these business email compromise type attacks where they are leveraging like a little bit of trust within the organization, or account takeovers and things like that. I think we've taught most of our folks not to just trust blindly. I think we need to enhance that conversation to include all of this new technology where there is the capability to trick people into what they're seeing being actually true or not.
I'll respond to your question. I'll not state the one that
No,
was
no,
used to create
afterwards when we're not being recorded, I want to play with it.
So we'll definitely share. But the detect and respond response technology was the one which won the RSA Sandbox competition. They're announced as the top innovator of this.
That's awesome.
And probably either John or Allison, if you want to jump in here too. I'm curious, I know Allison, you talked about how a lot of these groups are using AI to advance their motives that aren't new, but I'm curious, what are you seeing and who's investing? What are you seeing from nation states? What are you seeing from criminal gangs? How are they using these tools?
It's hard to tell because we don't have a lot of insight into like the outcome. But again, I think they're using them the same way that we are, right? How do we speed up operations? How do we mass analyze large data sets, whether it be vulnerability information or breach data or automation of things that used to be manual efforts on their behalf. So again, it's really hard to tell what they're doing specifically unless it's right in our face, like a terrible fake human that's masquerading as someone they're not, or deep fake. Fortunately, a lot of those, so far, the ones that I've seen are pretty suspect, make you question what you're looking at. But it remains to be seen what that will look like without some of the companies that are running these AI tools being very transparent about what they're seeing. So that Microsoft report I thought was excellent, just in terms of confirming what we thought they were doing in using these technologies.
Yeah. I'll stay out of the misinformation piece, mostly because it's terrifying.
Yeah.
About using that. But from the threat landscape, if you take nothing else away from me or us up here, about how do you manage threats in 2024, hopefully this is coming through, is that the goals and the objectives of the adversary is our guiding light to drive our strategy. We have to pay, it's very easy for us, because we're all nerds and we love the technical bits, and it's very easy to dive into the MITRE attack techniques, and these are the new malware bypasses and stuff like that. It's very easy to get in there, and those change, right? The technical implementation of how this stuff goes on does change. The goals and the objectives have not changed, right? So we can't, when we talk about how are they possibly using it, who knows? Really, unless you actually have access, you're speculating, right, at that point. And I think that's kind of dangerous. But what we can do is see the cause and the effect of an attack and say, what was their goal at the end? What was their objectives and how they went through that? And did we see a seismic change? No, then likely we're enhancing our continued strategy. Now, when we get to the point, whenever we have potentially like an AI, like a criminally designed large generative AI model that is super charming, we'll call it Dwyer GPT. This is what I'm talking about. Like, this is what you need to think about from a goals and objective point of view. I'm getting out of the ransomware game, and instead, I'm going to deploy my super charming generative AI model out on the internet, and I'm going to have my model convince your model to make business or investment decisions that benefit myself. Like, that's a change in objective, right? And that's the kind of stuff that we need to look out for so we don't get lost in the sauce, right? It's very cool and we all kind of love this thing, but take nothing else away from that is that we really need to take a step back. We're talking about the threat landscape and boil it down into what is the action on objective at the end, right?
And the threat actor motivations. I mean, it really hasn't changed. You know, we, as an industry, write annual reports year over year. And when we get down to the nuts and bolts of why threat actors are doing what they're doing, it's money, it's espionage, it's other strategic objectives that they're trying to accomplish. I don't really see that changing anytime soon. I mean, there are things that influence what they're focusing on in that, that spectrum of objectives, just depending on what's happening. But fundamentally, that's probably not going to change all that much.
Right? There was just that report about those people that stole someone's ChatGPT keys or something like that, and it was like cryptojacking for LLMs. They're basically using their API key to then make free of charge LLM resources. But that goes back into making money or resource hijacking.
Or collection objectives.
Or collection
Yeah,
objectives.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
this is all tied, it's all tied together, man, you know?
But one additional point I'll put to that is there'll be a lot more nuisance value that will be created. Right? In
Yes.
addition to the state actors' motivations, there'll be like normal people who have access to these toys will play around with and just create nuisance. And
Yeah, the scale is certainly, like, which is why we need to adopt this in security, because it's going to scale, and we need to scale appropriately
Yep.
to keep pace, right? And I think we'll get ahead of that.
Yeah, well, along those lines, I mean, Srini, you were talking about the voice clone you created with $1 to make a very convincing voice clone. I mean, it seems to me that that's a cheap way, low barrier entry to, and that has a potential to dismantle these really important identity controls that enterprises have implemented. So are they prepared for that?
so clients have come to us and said, we have a speaker-based authentication system. Okay, we think that it is exposed now. What do we do about it? So we are now working with them and say, okay, you have a speaker-based system. Now let's put a detection methodology and say, send the voice first, detect it that it is true, then send it to the authentication system, right? Similarly, in terms of the call center operations, when people make calls and asking for information about clients or other thing, so you also have to detect that that call is genuine and then send it to the next level or alert the operator to ask more questions about it. So large financial organizations have come up. They came to us asking for potential solutions. There's also, as part of your know your client, they will take digital images, like could be photographs, it could be driver licenses. There's a use case from Japan that came to us and say, we are seeing a lot of fraud accounts being created because of they've just been digitally morphed images and driver licenses information. Right? So for those things, we got to have this detection technologies, send it through that, validate, that's good, then send it to the next step and let the business process flow. So now we have to just up our defense, like what John was mentioning, right? We see this, we have to up our defenses, put the necessary technologies, and let the business continue.
Well, I think we want to leave a little time for Q&A here. So in light of that, I would like each of you to offer a takeaway. What do you want our audience today to take away from our discussion, bring home to their organizations? Srini, let's start with you.
So I'll summarize what I stated first. Right? It is about there are defenses available today. You can apply that, help your AI creators to build trustworthy AI. We as security practitioners have to have a seat at the table, that governance table, and help them to inspect the data, secure the data in transit and rest, help them to build that trustworthy AI. That's number one. I'm a big believer in zero trust principles. Never trust, always verify.
Yeah, so from my perspective, I think that we need to remember that, again, threat actors are new to this technology just like we are, and the way that we are looking to optimize our business practices, data analysis, the threat actors are doing the same thing. And again, I said this before, they're lazy. If things work as they are, they're not going to adopt something more difficult to achieve their objectives, which, again, those aren't going to change either.
I'm actually going to give you some homework that I'm really interested in. And I think what I want you guys, your call to action from myself, is that you likely already have some sort of AI attack surface. through the deployment machine learning has been out for a long time. And you probably have machine learning models hanging out on your endpoints. And I would like you guys to go ahead and start just assess how often people are going to Hugging Face and downloading a model, how many people are going and grabbing a model off of an S3 bucket, how many times someone's installing TensorFlow through Python. Do that homework to try to audit what it is. And I'm a walking, talking golden retriever. So you can hit me up on LinkedIn, and we'll talk a little bit about what that actually exists, and then I want you to, the next piece of that is how can that attack surface fit into the goals and the objectives of the adversary today. I think that'll do a great job in getting you started on how we think about securing your organization in 2030 and 2035 and beyond.
Well, thank you all. We have a couple mics. If anybody wants to ask any questions to our panelists here.
Thank you very much for the conversation. I have a question about the two examples that were brought in here, right? One was deepfake, and the other one was phishing. And the deepfake example, actually, yesterday SANS was doing a keynote presentation, and they had that as one of the top new threats that everyone has to watch out for. The question I have for the panel, but maybe specifically for Srini, why is it so hard for a machine learning model to detect deepfake versus not a deepfake? A human being cannot, right? But when you're actually creating a model with like maybe 1 million parameters over there for every pixel, why can it not detect that? And same goes for phishing emails as well, right? There is always going to be that one thing that the fraudster cannot do, right? That a legitimate thing can do.
Yeah. So there's actually a solution right now to detect deepfake voices, text, videos, and images. Okay, and much like you mentioned, it's based on machine learning, and so it has algorithms, 3 different algorithms, and an ensemble algorithm. It's able to crawl through the entire packet, whether it's audio or video or images, and then identify where exactly the fake was inserted, whether it's audio morphed or video morphed. So I'm just giving out the name of the company. It won the Sandbox competition a couple days back. Reality Defender is the name of the company, and they are exactly they have a solution, they're doing that part. And that's what we're looking at, bringing that technology into those examples that I mentioned about speaker-based authentication systems, call center operations. We're bringing that technology to do that inspection and response.
All right.
Great question, though. And just your instincts are great, because machine learning can actually detect machine learning. Where we're kind of tripping up, and this is what Srini's kind of alluding to, is that we haven't architected those sort of solutions into our infrastructure yet. So we have to prepare for that, giving that as an additional telemetry source going in the future.
The other question was about GDPR. So you mentioned it's very hard to delete data if the customer says delete my data. It's also applicable to CCPA, I think.
Right, yeah.
Is it hard to make the model unlearn, or is it impossible to make the model unlearn?
So it's about cost. Right? So for example, one of our researchers, security researchers at IBM, is doing this job. So she came up and said, she gave me a muffin example. So here is a muffin, there are cranberries and nuts that I'm trying to, the unlearning process that she was citing as an example is, I want to delete those, take out those cranberries and nuts. That's the unlearning part of it. I said, fair. And she's figuring it out, and with low cost. Right? This is not about take that data out of the data set and then retrain it. It will take 6 months, and a lot of compute resources will be required. So she's figuring out a way to just take out those cranberries and nuts. That's one part of unlearning. But the question I had for her is, okay, the muffin has sugar and butter in that, and the sugar is the bad sugar. I want to take the sugar out. How do we do it? That's a difficult task. It's a research activity that is underway. We are figuring out the nuts and cranberries. We will figure out the sugar. It's not there yet. It'll take some time and expense.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Well, great. Well, thank you all for joining us, and hope you enjoyed our talk. And thank you, panelists.
Thank you.